I think we're going to go ahead and get started, and then the cast will join us as they, get changed and everything. I'm Bruce DuBose. I'm the producing artistic director and the director of this show. And this is Sara Romersberger. She was the amazing fight choreographer.
Wow.
It was a real process. I mean, you can't really do this play unless you do the work of learning the whole fencing form and footwork. We started, the cast trained with a young fencing master. His name is Silas Choi. Hey, here's the cast. Great show, ladies. Thank you.
Oh, that cool chair feels so good on my thighs.
Nadia, DeWolf, Christina Cranshaw, and Lily Gast. So they trained with Silas in July for a few weeks, and that was like a process of letting their bodies get used to that whole form and everything. I think the first time, after the first session they had with Silas, they kind of came back like, oh my God, my legs,
Great pain.
It was a lot of that, letting your bodies kind of get used to that. And then Sara came in to just lay the groundwork for the fight choreography, and she really took it over. That's the challenge with this play, is to you really have to dig into that and convince the audience that you're, a fencer, so.
Yeah, and as I said once before too, in those first 10 days, we were at 2.5 hours in rehearsal for fighting, and then they'd work on the script afterward. So it was a lot of time to train and a lot of time to memorize all that choreography when you were a fencer. So these guys were fantastic.
Yeah. So what was that process for you like? I mean, that's like not only the training with Silas, but then I know when we were working on the choreography, it seemed like, oh, this must be all choreography, but it doesn't seem that way within the play. But to get into your muscle memory, all that, was that a difficult process?
Much like being a 17-year-old in the play, it kind of felt like the world was ending. It was like, when will my brain catch on to all of these fights? And then you're like, how do I handle all of this, and how do I memorize? And then I know I'm my worst critic, and so I would beat myself up anytime I didn't get something right. And Sara and Nadia and Lily were very patient, and so I'm very grateful for the experience, because it's like no other, I don't think, unless you're doing Foxcatcher with Mark Ruffalo and Steve Carell.
Fencing is so much harder than I thought it would be. It's like sword fighting. I was like, I could sword fight, and I was like, I'd run, I'd go to the gym. Like, how hard is it going to be? But I worked. It's so specific. Like Silas said that we might get fencer's legs, which is where your front thigh is really strong and your back calf is really strong. So lots of fencers are completely mismatched, but it's because it's not holistic at all. You are totally isolating specific body parts, and that was really hard, because it's not just like, oh, and I just give it my all and go forward. You're like, no, I have to step like this, and I have to do that. It's very, very precise. So getting the precision was very difficult, but important, because we're really hitting each other up here, so you gotta know. You gotta know where you're going.
Yeah, well, we started out training in Sabre, and then we switched because we were like, I mean, it's not really spelled out within the play what they're using, but it became clear that, oh, they're épée fencers, so that affected the scoring and all that.
With Sabre, it's a different target. It's a different, you slash instead of thrust. So it's so they had to relearn some new ways to do it too. I want to say something too. I know you're going to introduce other folks that were designers, music, lights, whatever. But one thing about working here for me, which was really exciting, and I think you probably, we all worked, and then we added some music, and then we heard some music cues, and we heard some this, and as you work, all of it becomes a journey you take together because it's a small space. And Paul's music then, right? So what happens is it's not just, well, you do this and you add this or you add costumes. It all was coming together, and it was really great.
Yeah, all the design elements couched the play nicely within Paul. Simran is our sound designer. Caitlin Jackson did the costumes. Robert Wynn did the set design and the video, a combination of Robert Wynn and Rob Menzel on that. But yeah, we had to figure out how to set it all. And the dialogue is so fast-paced, it's kind of like a fencing match. So there was so much fencing and choreography going on that some nights as director I would be like, well, I need to direct scenes at some point, but it all kind of worked. And the cast was so strong about being in the moment and working off of each other that I really didn't have to do too much of that other than staging. But well, what would you all like to? I know you have a question.
Yeah, sure. Amazing job, everyone. Great show. Hey, Nadia, how's it going? Good to see you. So I did fencing for a summer in high school, and but I wasn't good. Get
up here.
I remember you said about fencing is going to be easy. What do? You just sword fight, and I learned really quickly that sword fighting is almost you spend the least amount of time actually sword fighting. It's all up. You spend the most amount of time doing the pre-workout, and I was just not progressing, and I just decided to move on to other things. But I remember the worst. Like you said, it does kind of hurt a bit, even though it's like a dull point on the swords and you're all padded up. It's a kind of a beast thing there. The worst time I ever got hurt was when I made the stupid mistake of not having my glove tucked into my sleeve, and so the glove was hanging loose, and somebody thrust it, and it went through my sleeve right into my armpit. Did that happen with you guys too?
We haven't had that. We've had quite a few of the helmet comes to here, and then you have the little jacket, and sometimes you hit it just so perfect, and it goes right betwing the hook, right between the jacket, and you're like, oh, that is my neck. That's right there in my collarbone.
How did it even find skin?
Yeah. I thought it was
good. We're just so talented.
But what I was going to ask basically was moments like that. Were there moments when, in the actual scenes you're doing it, it's probably got us things a little bit, but were there any moments during rehearsal or actually doing the show where it was like, oh fuck, that is pain right there?
Christina and I were not allowed to be as reckless as we might have wanted to be. So there wasn't many instances of that because our stage management team was very much like, don't play with the swords.
Yeah.
And everyone, I mean, we're in the gear. We both have arm pads for the hit. We worked all of that stuff to avoid injury. The sneaky collarbone hit is kind of the worst thing that's happened, thankfully. But everyone's big on safety around here, so we're not allowed to play.
One scene where they were asking me is it just really quick? Do we really have to put our helmets back on? A big thing coming towards people's eyes.
Yeah. We pushed for it. We were like, listen, we'll be careful. And they were like, absolutely not.
It's really hot under the lights in those outfits. Yeah, it's really hot.
Yeah.
Yes.
Something I've realized as I've been digesting everything is that when you get hit, it takes a minute to take it in, and it feels like the script is sort of like that. There's moments that land later, but as an audience member, which I thought was wonderfully directed, is that you feel it before you understand it. I wondered how that felt as an actor and as a director to combine those two things that communicate so well with each other.
Yeah. What do y'all say?
Well, I feel like it definitely, there was a point I feel, and you chime in on this if you also feel this way. During Tech Week, we were so used to the dialogue is so boom, 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 and you don't really get a moment to process what's flowing out of your mouth. But then there are those moments where you say something and it's like, oh, I'm allowed to take a little breath there and really soak it in. And whether or not, being a 17-year-old and knowing the consequences of what we say and our actions, whether or not that hits us in that moment, or there's a moment where I think it's beautifully done where I say, also, I want my fighting art intact and my reputation. You take this really beautiful beat, and you're like, what does that mean?
He put that one in there. He put that beat in there. He said, you put a beat there. I said, okay.
Thanks for honoring the beat.
Well, you got it.
It was really ensemble. I mean,
Well, also a lot of it,
around.
much credit to Gracie Gardner, because she really did, there's not a ton of stage direction in the script aside from sort of listing out how the fights go, but there will be that one hurt. Something like that. So you get a little oh, we did it. And then and I was talking to a friend of mine last night who came to see it, and she was like, what's your favorite part of the show? And I was like, my favorite part is when Christina and I are like, what? What happened? Because it's one of the few moments in the script where we actually connect, where it's not sparring and it's not deflection and everything. It's we're actually talking.
And a question about the teacher.
That moment, and it happens so late in the script, but it does to me feel like the first moment that isn't a fight necessarily, because the rest of all the dialogue does feel very I'm going, oh no, it's like that.
It feels very much like, oh, you've got to witness an evolution of a relationship occur towards that end, even though you didn't really quite see it in between those moments of sparring and I eat eggs.
Lily, what's it like for you to come in as this character that's like a stranger comes to town, It's like all of a sudden.
I think most of the time I wonder, who do they think I am? When I come on, do they think I'm Shayna? And that she's fighting? Because sometimes I wonder, I'm like, oh, do they think I'm going to be Shayna? But obviously in the program it says a different character's name. It feels what it should feel like, I suppose. I think that I don't know. I really enjoy it. I don't know.
But you almost get to be a counterweight to the other pieces of the play, of them being young and moving and everything's moving, and then you get to come in and kind of back up, and you see your evolution as a character and kind of bringing back that idea that it's something you learned from your other partner. And I think it's kind of cool to see how you balance that back out and bring that back out.
It feels like a mirror or a bookend to the beginning of the show when Mary Wallace is like, why are you screaming at me?
Yes.
I don't like that. And then it's like, why are you doing it to me?
And then at the end of another play, you give me a cupcake.
Well, you say the same thing that I say. You say, I'm not hurting you, so it's something I get to do. That's a word for word.
Yeah.
Well, I knew that when I saw the program, I knew there were 3 actresses in it, and so watching this play for the most part, I was actually wondering this is so contained with these 2 people, who is this third person? What are they going to do? And so that your character was actually kind of on my mind in an interesting way up until you were revealed. Yeah. And when it did show you, it really made the whole thing feel like it was, I guess, in the real world, if that makes sense, because when you're watching plays like Waiting for Godot, when Pazzo shows up, it's like, oh, there's other people here. It snaps you out of it. And so having a third person enter where we've just been focused on these 2 people so much, I think really opens the whole thing up, I think, in a way,
I was totally surprised. I knew it was coming. I was still surprised.
We got her.
Question.
I have a question for the actors about, I know you're used to being in giving and receiving verbal attacks as actors, and that goes into how you respond and your characterization. But this one, you're under physical attack, you're delivering physical attack. I know it's a sport, but there's still somebody coming at you with a sharp object and they're trying to get points. How did actually doing that, feeling that, affect your characterization? How you interpreted the character, your whole presentation?
Oh, I think that's an excellent question. I feel like for Mary Wallace specifically, she's so wound up and so very controlled in her movements, but also, and you can see it, there's some playfulness tonight where Mary Wallace is, we've named the fights, so it was easy for us to memorize, but it's my Sicky Poo Poo fight, where after I come out, I'm like, what'd you call Henry? And yeah, but there's this beautiful moment, and it feels very private to Nadia and I when we're up there, and it feels also like something that Athena would do to Mary Wallace, and she's having fun with her after. It's like, we need to make an agreement, and it's like, just kidding, stab. So I don't know, there's really beautiful moments in that where it allows the freedom to play within the characterizations. I hope that makes sense. My brain's leaking out of my ears.
For a long weekend of shows. I think it was really, this is the most physically demanding show I've ever done. And it was very daunting, but I think it was actually like one of the most beneficial things I could have ever done. Like, it was so good for me. When we were like, you gotta learn fencing, I was like, oh man, and I have to be good at it? Like, I'm supposed to look scary, I'm supposed to like be strong and tough, and like, how do I do that? And so having those cues and being able to feel confident in the fighting, which is all thanks to Sara and Silas and everyone's great work, really, really helped me like kind of sit into my body and carry it even when we're not fighting. Like, there's still this like athlete gravitas, which I don't naturally have, but the sword definitely helped me get there.
Sara, what's it like to build these long fights? I mean, and how do you help actors like memorize that type of movement? I know.
One step at a time. Well, I'm not a fencer. I mean, I'm a fighter. I do broadsword, quarterstaff, rapier dagger, all those. But I'd never fenced before. And of course, this is a very specific épée kind of competitive fencing. So I spent a lot of time watching YouTube, not just the fights, but training on what you do, how low you stay, the names of the steps that they're doing, flèche, right, and hopped and putting all that together. So there was a big learning curve for me, and then trying to match what the energy of that specific fight to what it connoted in the scene. So if I knew they were going to do this, it had to make sense with what they were going to say later or in between. One of my students, 7 of my students were here today from SMU. Yeah, and one of them says, "Why didn't you do the whole match?" Because there was 2 days and Sarah's like, you're gonna learn a 15-point fight, and Christina were like, okay. And then they're like, we'll do a light change, it'll just be 12. And we're like, oh my god, thank god. Now I'm like, we could have done 15. Well, if we'd had another week.
Yeah.
But you just can't imagine. One thing is learning to spar, but another thing is learning to learn the choreography so they don't kill each other and the points are right and everything. That's what took a lot of time, and they did beautifully. And they have to stay low, they have to stay in form, they have to start each one exactly right. Otherwise, it loses the credibility for the cast.
Did you watch teenagers train or adults train?
I actually watched some of both, but most of the time I watched adults. You know, we had the Olympics right then. We had the Olympic, and then we had these women that are great. And also, fencing is much smaller and much quicker. I mean, I made it bigger, open, and covered more space because we're in the show.
Yeah.
So I took dramatic license. It was our
we made it a
decision.
little more dramatic than what
Yeah.
you will usually see.
Because so that you felt the energy. Otherwise, it's kind of boring. It's like,
Those people
They move. They move. You don't see the points. You're like, why are you standing so weird? And like, that's how they do it. That's how they really fence.
Yeah, so the tops and the bottoms were the same. And then the physicality and the bigness is much more like the men than the women.
Although Lee Kiefer does like to scream
Yeah.
when she scores a point. Yeah.
We even looked at that. So
Yeah.
people are just amazed.
Yeah.
They just
Another question real quick, if that's okay. I'm intrigued by the fact that we never figure out Athena's real name, and
you
Never will.
yeah, I was expecting to. I was thinking like in the back of my head, oh, like when we find out her name, it's gonna be like really meaningful and powerful, and you never do. What's the significance of that, do you think?
So we were when we first sat down to do table work, I was like, oh, it's so interesting that the name of the show is Athena, but like the protagonist is definitely Mary Wallace. Like you're definitely watching her journey. And I was thinking about like why, and then my reasoning, and we can all ask Gracie when she's here next week, is that it's like the spirit of Athena is inhabiting these different people. You know, it's like a badge you get to wear at one point. So I think when Athena leaves the show, she doesn't use that anymore.
Because it's like she's Athena at the end almost.
Yeah, exactly. Like it has sort of transcended, and now we are watching this other, you know, strategic warfare battle goddess. And it's just like a mantle that people get to pick up as they go.
Right. That's really cool.
Well, plus, it's one more thing that you don't have to give up.
Yeah, you get to keep hold of that, baby.
But Julia pointed out the other night that it was interesting how that Athena doesn't even like have her own name.
And Mary Wallace has two.
And Mary Wallace has two names.
And we even know her last name from the phone.
Yeah, Mary Wallace Carey.
Carrie.
On that sort of like topic of identity, I noticed that you had that line like in the beginning of the show about how you're just a reflection of what she's saying.
Yeah.
And how did y'all like deal with like these teenagers discovering who they are, and how did the fencing and all the physicality sort of come into that?
Nadia and I are very lucky because we've worked together on many productions before, and so we came in with this knowing of each other, and we all already had this rapport, and so it was easy to kind of dive into these characters. And a good friend of ours came to see John, came to see it, and then afterwards he was just like, "Those are just you two up there." And it's like, it's such a pleasure to get up here and get to hop around and discover and hit the shit out of each other.
Yeah.
And then just have a great afternoon after.
Yeah. I just think.
Question? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, kind of piggybacking off of something you said earlier, Nadia, is I found it very fascinating too that we have these two characters, and like it's very common to like have like the protagonist antagonist thing, and it becomes very clear pretty soon who is playing whom. But it was very neat that in this show, like you could make an argument that there really isn't one here.
Yeah.
If anything, y'all are just each other's pro and.
Yeah.
And I found that very fascinating, very refreshing, and I was wondering what that was like as actors to experience that, because we often wind up in shows where it's very clear who each other's role is.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
Like it was really great. I feel like we both have like little scenes and moments where we're like totally the villain, where we're like, I'm being mean and spiteful because I'm being mean and spiteful.
Right.
And then there's other moments where you're like, I'm being mean and spiteful because I'm hurt. Like, but there's so much motion from scene to scene that it isn't a super linear story like this, which I think is more fun for me, to get up here and do. But yeah, I had a great time.
I have a great time.
Anybody else have a question? Well, thank you all for joining us for a few minutes. Tell your friends, you got one more week, and Gracie Gardner will be here next weekend.